This is Spoontastic Minis. Some of you may remember the Kickstarter run by Duncan Rhodes and Trans Atlantis Games for 2 thin coats paints. Well, mine arrived today. So this is an unboxing video and a quick test of these paints. I'm just showing you what's in the box, starting with some spare bottles, some of the stretch goal miniatures, some more stretch goal miniatures. I think there's a bag of skulls, and then there's some more minis right in the corner, and then you'll find that there's the paints, all 60 of them. Now inside that first pack I removed, there's a card about taking care of the paints, some awesome stickers, and then there's a sheet which you're supposed to read first, and then there's a colour wheel and paint conversion guide on the back. Now a bit more detail on that card. It's all about wiping paint off the threads of the bottle before and after use. Now I'm just getting the paints out of the box. I'm not going to show every single one, but you should be able to see that the trick with these paints is they come in sets of 3. So it's basically a dark, mid and light version of each colour, which is part of how their process works. So to drive that point home, there's a dark green, the medium green, and the light green. And then it also works with metallics, so that's a dark gold, medium gold, and a light gold. You also have silvers in the same set. In addition, they sent some medium for thinning. They sent some special effects, zombie gore, and there's a blood one as well. And then there are 6 washes. So those are the first 3. Those are the second 3, everything else is ordinary paint. Now a bit more detail on those extras. These are the spare bottles. I'm not entirely sure why we need spare bottles, but it's a nice feature to have, I guess. And as you can see, there are 3 parts to each one: bottle, nozzle and cap. The nozzle does take a bit of pushing in, but that's probably good because that means it won't come out too easily in use. And you see it's exactly the same as the normal paint bottles. Now these are the skulls. I'm not actually going to get these out of the bag for now, but you can put those on bases or any kind of terrain. And then I've sort of mocked up all these miniatures and bases so you can see what they are. Pretty cool. I haven't glued them to bases or anything though. Now let's give those paints a try. So I'm going to be using the oranges. You can see them here along with the actual paints on the palette. So we're going to start with Rust Orange, move on to Fanatic Orange, and then go to Orange Flare. And we're going to be painting this mini from Star Hat Miniatures, which is a duck soldier, which I'm going to be painting the beak of, which will be a nice vibrant orange colour using these 3 paints. I'm not sure if you're supposed to shake them, but I'm giving them a little shake, and I'm quite pleased to find there is actually an agitator which you can hear inside the bottle. As you can see, the nozzle is pretty clean to start with, so you can just pour it straight onto the palette. I didn't use very much because I know I'm going to be watering it down and there's not a big area to paint, so this should be fine. Now, based on how Duncan Rhodes shows his painting videos, I'm putting some water on the palette and then adding some paint to it to make sure it's nice and thin. And then we're going to do 2 thin coats of Rust Orange on the beak of the Star Hat Miniatures Duck Soldier. Now, one of the first things you'll notice is the coverage of just 1 coat isn't spectacular. but that's perfectly fine because this whole system is designed around doing 2 coats of pretty much everything. So I'm not too worried at this point that the coverage could be better. Of course it could, but it will be by the time I do the second coat. Now, interesting case in point, there is a bit of the green paint on the underside of the beak, so it'll be a good test for coverage to see if that gets covered up later. Obviously it's still showing through a bit this first coat, but this coat is very thin and very transparent, and so we'll see later on when I've done 2 coats if that's actually covered up or not. Okay, that's the first coat done, and now that it's dry we're going to do exactly the same again. So we're still using the rust orange, the darkest orange paint, but we're going to go over it again for a second thin coat, and hopefully the coverage should be much improved. Now it does look like there's several gaps in the paint. Unfortunately it's where my lights are catching it, particularly on the front of the beak where you can actually see like a white spot. It's just a reflection of my lights, whereas when I turn it away from the light you can actually see it does actually have orange paint on it, so it's a little bit deceptive. Right, now that that's dry we can introduce the next paint, which I believe is called Fanatic Orange, also giving that a very slight shake, and as it turns out there is a teeny bit of paint at the top of the bottle having done that, but that's fine, I can put that straight onto the palette. You might also notice in the background there is another Star Hat Miniatures Duck Wizard, which I'm also painting the beak of at the same time, just to make sure that this isn't a fluke or that I'm not, getting it wrong or anything. Now, I'm going to be doing a layering highlight, which seems to be the way these paints work. You're supposed to start with the darker colour and build up a highlight gradually by layering. So I'm going to do 2 layers of this colour, and then we'll see for the lightest colour how it looks. But first I've got to apply the paint where I think the light would fall, so mostly on the raised edges and the front of the beak in particular, which is where the eye would naturally look, not too much on the underside. So most of the work in terms of covering up the beak has already been done. Now it's just a question of highlighting it with this next colour. Now what you'll find as we go along is I gradually highlight a smaller and smaller area, so I actually do less painting at each stage as it gets more and more highlighted. That seems to be how this painting system works, always starting with a dark colour, then a medium colour and then a light colour. Now that having dried, we're now going to do a second coat of exactly the same paint. That didn't take long to dry, so I'm using exactly the same paint off the palette and just trying to highlight a slightly smaller area, using exactly the same paint and exactly the same brush as before. Now, I don't know if you can see, but that green spot underneath the beak did actually get covered up quite well by the original coat of paint. I'm hoping there's some footage where you can actually see the underside quite well, but I haven't really seen it yet, so just keeping you informed there. Now that that's dry, we're moving on to the lightest orange colour, which seems to be called Orange Flare. So this is a lot lighter than the previous 2 and should make for quite an obvious highlight. So again, putting some water on the palette and then adding paint to it, and then that should make it nice and thin. And then we can just highlight the smallest areas, building on what we've already done, to just finish off the highlights. Now, my original intention was to do 2 thin coats of every single paint, but what I realized was by the time I was done with this one highlight, it actually looked about right. It looked like I wanted it to. So although I could have highlighted it even further, I decided it was enough once I'd done this coat. I'll show you a still picture later to see what I mean. Now this is just a quick test of these paints, but so far I'm very impressed by the quality and consistency of them. The fact I've hardly had to shake them, they work straight out of the pot, albeit you're supposed to water them down a little. And if you do stick to the 2 thin coats methodology, I can't see you going wrong with these paints. So that's done. And let's take a better look at it. That's after it's dry, and now it's fully highlighted. It's a bit hard to see under these lights, so I took a still picture on my phone, and now you can see both of the miniatures with the beaks fully highlighted. Right, if you've watched this far, firstly thank you for watching. I very much appreciate it. If you did like the video, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell-shaped icon to let you know when the next video will be coming out. I hope it will be soon.